All right, we're a little early tonight, but it's still daylight out. But you know what? I'll take it. The rain is creating like a nice misted shine off my windows there. I'm going handheld tonight. We're going old school. It's the next episode of the Talkin TV Variety Hour. We may have duped you guys with our thumbnail. We're talking about the first Quiet Place tonight, a little bit of a retrospective of it as a little bit of a preamble before we get into our review on A Quiet Place 2 coming up. We're talking about Master of None Season 3. We're talking about Mainstream. And we've got some brand new movie news as far as in order to kind of, add as a nice little capper of what we talked about last week. Chris, you excited?
Yeah, man, I got a lot to say about a lot of different things. So honestly, I say we just roll the thing and get into it. If you're
yes, let's roll the thing and get into it. All that I say is I don't know what it is, but I think this handheld thing is like I kind of feel like an MC right now, so that's why I feel like more hyped up than usual. Next episode of the Talkin TV Variety Hour. Let's get this going. All right, what's going on, everybody? Talkin TV Variety Hour number 2. As we said last week, this is kind of just like the hour on Fridays that we just take to sit back, chill, talk about everything that's going on in the world of movies, answer some fan questions, and, just continue to not be, forced to go off of Disney's latest IP drop that they have going on, which really sucks because the last couple of weeks they had, like, some pretty big bangers. I haven't gotten a chance to catch up with the new episode of Bad Batch yet, but hey, you can't hit them all. Real quick, can you pull up Luke's comment? What does he mean by that? Luke, I love you to death, but sometimes you just drop these random tidbits of knowledge. They could be a reference to one thing we say, they could be another. So like, dude, I love the comments. Keep them coming, but like, you got to be more specific with this. What do you mean by this?
Soccer,
with the hardship. Well, I don't watch soccer, so how would I know that?
Sports.
I don't watch sports.
I don't watch soccer either, but I have enough of an understanding to know that penalties screw things up.
How many times have I called it sports ball? How many times?
Luke likes hockey, so that could be like the one.
That is true. That is true.
Luke. But either way, welcome to the show, Luke, and everyone else. It's great to be here and hang out with you guys tonight. Like Dom said at the beginning of this thing, we have a banger to get through, and we honestly only have an hour to do it because quite literally after this episode, we are going to the theaters with our good friend Professor Pat, and we're going to watch A Quiet Place Part 2. Yep. So honestly, Dom, I say we just get right into it.
Will it hold up? Will it hold up to the might and majesty of the first one, or will it end up being another mediocre movie like the first one? Because if that's just like the ripping the Band-Aid off as far as the segue into my thoughts of the first Quiet Place, I mean, look, like March of 2018 was an interesting time, right? It was the beginning of my second semester up at Oswego. We hadn't talked for a little bit. I think the last time that you and I had talked before that was that time where we went on like that hour long, just like, I don't even know how long it was. It was like raining by the end. It was really cold and miserable. We just went on that trek around Central Park in Manhattan. I think we had a plan to do. I think we had places to go. We didn't end up going anywhere. We literally just walked around the city. I still, for the life of me,
it didn't matter. It was a good time.
I still look at every single interaction we had between when we left Duchess and when we actually started the podcast as far as contributing to the podcast, even if it wasn't actually contributing to it. But so, March of 2018, right? John Krasinski, even though he directed a couple things beforehand, you know how it goes with this Hollywood marketing game. He's directing a big movie. It looks like a big budget spectacle. Obviously, it had the hype of being shot in our area. They were like, oh, John Krasinski's directing this movie, A Quiet Place, right? And I talked to some people who had gotten a chance to see it before I went to see it to the local Oswego theater to watch it, and I'm like, was this good? And they were hyping it up. They're like, oh man, this movie's amazing. This movie's awesome. Like Krasinski, he's not Jim from The Office anymore, because famously, obviously, I feel like of all of the kind of sitcom stars that transition afterwards, I feel like Krasinski's always been in that weird position of being like, he's constantly trying to like escape being Jim from The Office, but like he also still relies on it. It's like this really weird intermediate space. I don't really know how to describe it, but I watched A Quiet Place in theaters, and I thought the opening scene was dope. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was an excellent way to build tension. The way that they slowly and subtly laid all the hints without a single word of dialogue up until that surprise reveal at the end of the opening sequence when the one kid gets snatched up by the creature out of nowhere. I thought it was filmed excellently. I thought that opening scene was amazing. And I thought the rest of the movie was kind of just, I'm like, it's good. I've seen a lot worse for directorial debuts. It's good. It's competently well made. It's competently well shot. He knows how to hold the camera and keep it in focus, and the scenery is gorgeous. As far as the actual story and logistics go, it's another typical like post-apocalyptic story with all of the typical like hey drums and humdrums and bad cliches and dumb storytelling techniques that all these typical movies have in it. Because like every other apparent story that Hollywood does, it has the list of cliches that they have to check off with each movie, you know? So like, I mean, those are just like my thoughts on it. Like, but like I said, this is really our first time like communicating our thoughts like on this movie, you know, like for the purpose of the podcast, but also like just in general, because like you and I really haven't had that much of a chance to like talk about this movie, which is strange considering what a phenomenon it was.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think Krasinski is one of those guys who, like, he's not almost famous. He is famous, but I think he's like, it's strange because he should be more famous than he is. And I think, like, Emily Blunt certainly boasts his fame quite a bit because obviously she is such a celebrity where it's like, there's no doubt that she's a top tier A-lister. But for him, it's like, yeah, he was a major part of groundbreaking sitcom, arguably one of the most groundbreaking American sitcoms of all time.
Arguably
if
the
not,
most.
Yeah, I was going to say, if not the most. And so that's tough because you get typecast. But the thing about The Office is, as opposed to other sort of sitcoms, like you do get typecast and a lot of guys get stuck in roles. Like in you look how long it took Ray Barone to sort of get out there and be anything but the lead on Everybody Loves Raymond. And, even he's only had a few different roles here or there. Like you still see him as like that legendary character. But The Office never really had that issue, right? Because people were very proactive on the set of that show. Steve Carell wasn't just Michael Scott, right? He was the 40-year-old virgin. He was in Anchorman. He was doing a bunch of things, man. He was in other movies during the run of the show. Obviously, Ed Helms going on to do other things. Rashida Jones making a name for herself. And it's just, so I don't think that show kind of has the issues of what you're talking about. So I don't think him making A Quiet Place was anything other than passion. I don't think it was a way to say, hey, I'm not just that guy from The Office, because I think audiences had gotten so used to the actors of that show having other projects being aired and having success throughout the run of it, where I don't think that it was the typical sitcom sort of stigmatization of, oh, you're only that person. You can only ever be that person, which happens to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, look at that Leah Remini woman, right? She's literally had such a hard time getting roles after The King of Queens that I don't even know what happened with that whole cult thing or something, but like she literally went insane afterwards because that's what happens when you have a big sitcom.
Poor Leah Remini.
Yeah, you literally get stuck in something and you can't get out. No pun intended.
Yeah, but comedy is the easiest way to get typecast in just American media.
Yeah, because it's so easy and it's you can put it on and unwind from the day. It's like that type of thing. So I honestly don't buy when people are like, oh, well, this was Krasinski having to do something so drastic. Nah, I just think the man's always kind of been a filmmaker. He shot The Office intro. He was, he's the type of actor that goes out there with the camera, messes around, gets shots, even if it's just for fun, He's like a filmmaker actor. He's not just someone who's there to read a script and go on to the next script, right? Like he wanted to direct episodes of The Office, but unfortunately the show got cut short when he was kind of about to make that transition into that role. And, so he's got an interest in the moving parts of a film set. And so I think you could say what you want about Quiet Place in and of itself, but I don't think that it should come into the conversation about the quality of this project because I think the two aren't the same, if that makes sense. This was not a desperation project. This was, hey, I think I'm a talented guy. I believe I'm an artist, and I'm going to make a movie. So I don't think it was any sort of, hey, I'm not just Jim.
No, and the thing is, look, I mean, I get that the whole like idea of stars is that I almost feel like it's kind of like what's the word I'm looking for? It's almost like kind of a thing that's expected of comedy stars, right? Where it's like, oh, I'm in that famous comedy role that everyone's going to recognize me. Now it's like I almost have to break out of it. I'm not going to say that it's necessarily the stars themselves, more so just the system, obviously, within which they have to work, right? Because I don't think it's not necessarily a conscious thing at first. It just grows in their head over time. And I've never once thought that, like, Krasinski was a guy that, like, could have been typecast. It's just a matter of, I just didn't really see him in anything else. What was interesting is that Right, because obviously, famously, I was very, very young when The Office came out, so I didn't get a chance to really watch anything else that he was in coming up throughout that show. Like, I only knew him as Jim from The Office, right? And then I start seeing him, like, obviously, once I start expanding in, like, you know, into, like, my movie watching phase in, like, the second half of the 2010s, which is when I really came into my own. My whole thing, I love the Knicks comment, by the way. That was fantastic. Like, I'm not even a Knicks fan. Like I said, I'm not even a sports ball. I'm not even a sports ball fan in any way, shape, or form, which is the funniest part about that. And I will continue to call it sports ball because I literally know nothing about any of the sports. But no, I think that the thing that stood out to me the most about A Quiet Place originally is the fact that it's like, okay, so a comedy star is doing what I typically see. You know, like usually what I see when it comes to comedy stars, right? When it comes to breaking out of the mold, right? This is not necessarily anything that I'm prescribing on them. It's just a thing that I notice based off of what I see, based off of the track that which they go with, which is they usually go with one of two directions in order to try and break out of that direction. They go with action or they go with drama. And those are usually one of the only two ways. You know, you either get like a John Cusack who tries to transition out of like, you know, kind of the teen coming of age roles that he was known for and did some not so crazy action movies in the late 90s with Grosse Pointe Blank and Con Air, to name a few. And then you've got like the Robin Williams, Jim Carrey route where they're so known for like their family dramas, like their zany over the top natures, that they usually try to pull it back and give these really meaty dramatic roles, like with Robin Williams, like with Dead Poet Society, and then Good Will Hunting, and then with Jim Carrey with Truman Show and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. You know? So, again, like, it's interesting to see that Krasinski went with the action route. I think that definitely the Emily Blunt of it all is interesting, considering that she was kind of already making her foray into action like a couple years before he did this. And obviously, he's got the Jack Ryan show, and he was in the Michael Bay movie that came out after the fourth Transformers movie, that 13 Hours, The Secret Soldiers of Benghazi movie, which is actually pretty good as far as that goes. But I think that, like, the thing that is immediately noticeable is the fact that I don't necessarily know if he's trying to make a statement. I think the thing that's noticeable is, you're right, the idea that he is just trying to do something that he's extremely passionate about. Because I was just, you know, reading some tidbits about, like, kind of the inception of the movie. And the inception really is quite fascinating, which is the idea that he wrote the screenplay with these two friends who grew up in Iowa. You know, these guys who, you know, typical filmmaking story, they've known each other since they were little kids. These guys, Scott Beck and Brian Woods, who grew up together in Iowa, and they watched numerous silent films in college. They basically began working on the story that led to the film, right? Basically, the idea of they wanted to recreate a silent film for the modern day, and then you kind of bring in, you know, kind of, you know, the alien edge of it, where it's like, oh, they can only operate off of sound. Like, that concept is cool, right? But how often have we talked about the idea of, like, the concept versus application? You know, that's kind of what I get at when I say, okay, this part is cool, but then the actual, like, rest of it, you know, like, that's kind of like where my critic brain, for lack of a better word, kicks in, and I'm like, okay, this is cool, but, like, how long before a concept becomes a gimmick, you know?
Yeah, fair enough. I don't think it was ever a gimmick in this situation, though, because it's just the rules of the world, you know? I mean, it's like, okay, we know that Marvel has certain rules. We know that DC has certain rules. Are those gimmicks, you know? Are the boxes that Snyder put into the Justice League a gimmick? No, it's just kind of the rules you play by. And if you buy into that universe, then you have to buy into those rules. And so that's why I don't see it as such.
Right.
Because I think this movie clearly wasn't a gimmick when you look at how there was imposter films. You know, Asylum made an imposter film, and Bird Box was a more serious type version of it. So I don't think something sparks like a mini movement within a genre if it's a gimmick or has sort of rushed qualities. Now, I don't think it was a perfect film either. I think the script was a little messy at times, and I think really this film hinges on the technicals and sort of like the rush of something we hadn't seen in quite a long time in filmmaking, that being like, you know, the use of silence and the tension that can create as kind of like a forgotten tool of filmmaking. But then it quickly kind of, I think, shows its hand, and if you don't introduce new things into the movie, it loses lackluster. But that never bothered me. See, all I'm saying right now is I can see why people would say that, and I get it, but I was fully in on this movie from minute one to to the final minute. I think it's a phenomenal breath of fresh air into the apocalyptic genre, which is very oversaturated. I think that the performances were awesome. The children really sold it, and most of the times I don't think they do in horror films, and that was rare to come by. And last but not least, I think the chemistry between Blunt and Krasinski in the first film was so strong. Obviously, they're married, but I think they kind of were able to embody these characters and not play the couple that we know in real life, which is, I think, very hard to do. and I think they pulled it off really well. So I really never understood the criticism of this movie, especially since those were my thoughts before being a critic, and I rewatched it to do my homework in preparation for tonight and this weekend, and I still feel the same way. I just think it's a solidly made film. It's not incredible, but it's solid, and I don't think that it would have had a second one made and a potential trilogy on the way if that wasn't the case. But I don't know. What's your take on everything I just said?
No, I guess to kind of just offer my final thoughts on kind of my whole take on The Quiet Place, well, I'll definitely say that the first movie, it's not the worst movie I saw that year, not at all, especially considering the 2018. Oh, man, you want to talk about some bad movies that came out that year. I can rattle off like 20 bad movies that came out that year. So I don't necessarily think it's the worst movie that year. It's a solid debut overall. It just ultimately, at the end of the day, it didn't do anything for me as far as kind of, as far as kind of the emotional spark of the movie. There were moments that came out that were supposed to be very emotional that I just kind of like brushed off. It was kind of like whatever, and almost kind of ended up coming off as unintentionally hilarious. And I think the only kind of thing that I have to add about that is I love the point that you brought up as far as like every kind of genre, specifically with every story that we see having those kind of boxes you need to check off, right? Kind of bouncing off my point. And the only thing that I'll say to that is there are certain of those genre cliches that I like, and there are certain of those genre cliches that I don't. I love whenever you get a team together. I love whenever you need to pull off a heist. I love that. I hate romance. I hate kind of teen angst, and I hate apocalyptic cliches. So those are the only things that I'll say kind of, if I'm throwing in my personal thoughts as opposed to like kind of my professional quote unquote opinion, take that for what you will. That's what kind of sets me apart from like as why I couldn't necessarily get into this movie the way that a lot of other people did. I fully am for all the people who got a lot out of this movie, and I'm all for it, especially considering that like how often can a star like put out an original work like this and have it be as widely recognized. And we gotta praise that shit whenever it happens, because it almost never happened, and in theaters too, not on streaming. Like we gotta praise that shit whenever it happens, But I gotta give my honest thoughts on it when it happens.
No, I feel that. I mean, the last thing I got to ask you, because I am very much so looking forward to the second movie.
Yeah.
I was bummed when it got delayed right at the start of the coronavirus pandemic. And now
the second
we're here.
one.
It's finally here. I've been looking forward to this one, and we have obviously a fun night planned for us, so that just adds to the excitement. But outside of us like seeing this tonight, were you anticipating this one, or is it more of like a homework watch for you? Where's your head at?
Here's the thing, where I never once go into a movie, like not that I despise the term. I think it's a good term, but I always kind of despise the idea of having to watch something for homework, right? Because the whole thing, right, is that homework is obviously something that nobody likes to do it, right? It's that thing that you have to do, but nobody likes to do it. I always said that the minute that I had to watch something that I didn't like or that I wasn't looking forward to in any way, shape, or form, just for the sake of the podcast, I'd quit. I said that, the whole thing where, as you brought up multiple times, whenever we talk about the Disney stuff that we are bored to tears by and completely despise, at this point, that at the very least, we wouldn't be giving our full honest take if we weren't looking forward to it going into it. So what I will say about this movie is that while I was not necessarily the most impressed by the first one, what I've always said is, look, first time is the first time, right? But if it gets a sequel, I have seen multiple sequels build off of an initial entry that I was not necessarily the biggest fan of, in ways that I thought, oh, wow, that really changed my mind. Okay, that changed my perspective on this. I'm hooked now, in a way that the first one really didn't. So that's what I'll say going in. I only watched the trailer once. Because I didn't want to necessarily, it wasn't one of those scenarios where I'm like, oh, I got to rewatch the trailer 30,000 times to get like all the different Easter eggs and references, I like that this one is continuing to like expand on the world in a way that I didn't necessarily think was possible, but I also like that it's not going in the direction of like a Sicario 2, where that movie had a very clear, definitive ending, and then you get a sequel from a completely different filmmaker, and you're just like, why is this getting made, And I'm not gonna like respect it just for the purposes of like, oh, they made this movie just because they could. I'm like, no, I'm never of that opinion. You never make a movie just because you can. I hate that idea. That's why we have garbage like what The Asylum turns out. You make a movie for a reason. And so Krasinski, obviously, besides the fact that the first one made a shitload of money, he clearly had a reason for doing this, and I'm always interested when it comes to that.
Cool. Well, fair enough, guys. Let us know what you thought about Quiet Place, the first one. If you're looking forward to A Quiet Place Part 2 and what your plans are to go and see it. Are you having a fun movie night? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to like this video, hit that bell so you can get notified every time we go live, and of course, please subscribe. Now, Dom, what is our second topic this evening?
Our second topic for this evening, I got to consult the doc because I don't know if you changed the schedule around me. So we are doing mainstream next. All right, so mainstream, because I was preparing for something. So, oh man, I'm was okay. So it's actually kind of funny because it actually does kind of build into our thought as far our point before as far as championing original ideas, because I was not expecting to cover this next. Okay, so well, I guess first and foremost, I gotta ask, like, I brought up this movie, right, as far as I'm like, okay, there's an indie movie that no one except outside of our circles is talking about, right? And we gotta champion those movies. We gotta champion those types of original movies. So I told you about it. I told you what the elevator pitch was. You were like, hell yeah. The minute you said Andrew Garfield and this premise, I'm in. So now, after having watched it, it was a nice short watch, right? Only an hour and a half. What did you think of Mainstream?
Sure, I like that you're letting me go first.
I have to, because like I've been thinking about this movie all day, and I'm like, I still can't wrap my head around it. You know, I've watched it like in bits and pieces twice, sort of. So like, I gotta get your thoughts first.
Sure, yeah. So just so everyone knows, the second I hear Andrew Garfield, I'm hooked. I haven't seen a movie that he's in that I don't love, and so when Dom was like, Mainstream, this little indie film, I was like, wait, how did I not hear about this? And this movie really is not being pushed at all.
No.
It just kind of seems like it was made and forgotten about. And I think that is very unfortunate, because I think that this is the strongest social commentary that I've seen about influencer culture, social media addiction, the way that our phones make us then treat the people around us. And I haven't seen something this poignant in a very long time, probably since The Social Network. And I have to say, it is such a crime against filmmaking that this film is being treated the way it is. Now, you hinted at maybe there's some scandal, something I don't know about, but I'm not
necessarily a scandal per se.
Okay, but I don't want to let that taint what I'm going to say about the movie first. So before we get into this undertone that I'm not quite sure of yet, I have to say, I think Andrew Garfield is one of the most creative actors out there. And with how much I heard he put this film on his back, too, I mean, he's a little more than an actor these days. He's kind of like a pseudo-producer from what I understood, and his commitment to the role is just something that you kind of really look for. It's almost like, you know, Heath Ledger-esque in the way that he really gets into these characters and just, like, takes them home with him. You know, it's crazy. They say don't bring your work home with you, but obviously don't ever let Andrew Garfield hear that, because this movie, man, it's something special. I gotta say, it was really just so well done. It has that sort of like indie vibe that I love, and it is certainly a very unique vibe. And I know that this is an off-putting A24-esque vibe that, you know, I forget who was IFC. They're pretty good too. They kind of give me A24 feels every now and then, and this is one of those moments where I think they kind of tapped into something special, because while I do think the ball gets a little dropped in the third act as we get maybe a little too grandiose for our own good, I still stayed up way too late watching this. I plan to watch it in parts just because of how busy we are, but I was like, I got to see this in one shot. And it's not just Andrew Garfield who's charming and brilliant in this movie. I mean, all our three leads are all just incredible.
Yeah,
and,
your girl Robin from Stranger Things season 3.
Yeah, dude, she was phenomenal. She was awesome. And I got to say, then I'll turn it over to you. You know, I've been to LA, and I have some friends who are doing some things, and man, the double crossing, the you know, every man for themselves mentality, it all came across as the super, you know, they call it the city of angels, yet everyone I've met there is a devil. That's what I started telling people when I got home from my trip. It's like, except for the two people I knew out there, it's just like, I felt so bad. All my old friends are surrounded by these fake leeches who just want to suck the life out of them. And man, this movie encapsulated it. But what is your thoughts on Mainstream?
All right, so before I get into my thoughts on the movie, I got to take you back and kind of, you know, again, remind people of a little filmmaker who once made a little movie, you know, that ended up being the highest grossing movie of all time. Well, not of all time, but close to it, roughly almost 50 years ago next that also happens to be my favorite movie of all time. That is the one and only Francis Ford Coppola, a.k.a., you know, the director of The Godfather and The Godfather 2, the two greatest movies ever made. I will not hear anything else. Shut up about Citizen Kane. I love that movie. It's fantastic, but it has to have shit on those first two Godfathers. They're the two greatest movies of all time. Coppola's got a lot of family members. Obviously, famously, his sister is Talia Shire. Of Rocky fame, his two nephews are Nicolas Cage and Jason Schwartzman, who was in this movie, but he's also got a lot of family members that not a lot of people know about. And one of them is the director of this movie, her name being Gia Coppola. She is his granddaughter. I don't remember through who specifically, but couple years ago, she directed a movie called Palo Alto. That was another kind of one of these movies. It was almost kind of like the spiritual originator of this movie. It was kind of in the vein of like when Perks of Being a Wallflower came out. You had that wave of like really interesting kind of coming of age teen movies, like that was followed up by Spectacular Now, Short Term 12, Dope, Meet Earl and the Dying Girl. You almost saw like this rebirth of like this coming of age renaissance, right? And for the most part, even though those movies were all a little bit too hipsterish for their own good, they all had like this really endearing, like this really ingenious kind of coming of age charm that really you hadn't seen since the days of John Hughes in the 80s, right? And so I was watching a lot of these movies, and for the most part, I really enjoyed all of them. I think there wasn't a single one that I didn't enjoy, except for this movie, Palo Alto, which was a movie about kind of, again, California teens coming up and growing up and just committing all sorts of debauchery. Right now, again, having never been to California, having never once interacted with the culture out there, I have no idea if any one of this was legit, but there was just something about that movie that ultimately felt kind of meaningless, kind of meandering, kind of pretentious, kind of, pseudo, for lack of a better word, like not really actually being as genuine about the things that it was trying to portray. That movie had a really kind of off-color subplot that, like, obviously clearly does not age well, about James Franco like forming a relationship with a girl that's still in high school, played by Emma Roberts. There's some very uncomfortable undertones that are announced in that movie. And famously, I was one of very few people who was not the biggest fan of that movie, but I knew people who were diehard fans and loved that movie. So definitely seeing this movie as her follow-up, and I saw Gia Coppola, and then at first I was psyched. I'm like, finally, another Andrew Garfield movie, because I'm like, everything that I've seen him in since the Spider-Man movies, like you're right. I agree with you 1,000% on Garfield. The man is a committed actor. Say what you will about him, but he does things with his performances that just barely any actor does, right? He gets so into character, he gets so method about it, but not in a way that's like pretentious, in a way that like, it's like, no, he actually like legitimately, oh my God, there's still somebody that like cares about the craft of acting. And I will say that, say what you will about those Amazing Spider-Man movies, you can't take anything away from him. Because Garfield really does, I think, bring something to the table in those movies that you just don't see in that type of blockbuster like filmmaking. Especially the second one, which is widely known as like one of, if not the worst Spider-Man movie ever made. I don't necessarily agree with that, but that scene where he's just like chilling with the little kid that he just randomly saves from bullies, and he's like, "Oh, you made that? You know, that little windmill?" Like, that's a genuine, heartfelt moment. It's like, who does that? Who does that in these gigantic blockbuster movies? Right. But the thing that I will say now going into this movie is that performances are great. The look is great. Gia Coppola knows how to shoot a movie. The message, I'm about there finally being one of these movies, because this is the latest in a string of movies that you've been seeing that are kind of like trying to make commentary on kind of the effects of social media kind of on our brain, specifically on the youth's brain, right? I've seen a couple movies in the last couple of years follow up on this. Assassination Nation, I thought was an interesting but ultimately misguided effort, and there was a movie that came out last year, ironically enough, starring another Stranger Things actor, what's it called? Ironically enough, Robin's almost fling in Stranger Things Season 3, Steve himself, Joe Keery, called Spree last year, which I did not get a chance to watch, but a lot of people who I watched very much enjoyed and told me that it did attempting something similar to this movie. And while I will say again that the message behind it, I think, is excellent, and I definitely think that it is warranted, and I think that more of these types of movies need to be made concerning the effects of social media, especially given just kind of the fact that so many people still don't quite understand its outreach and don't quite understand how it is changing people's brains on a subliminal level that they aren't even aware of. But I don't necessarily know if it works all the way, is the only thing, right? It's a tricky situation, because like I said before, we need to champion these types of original ideas. Otherwise, everything we're going to get is just Disney flooded schlock spectacle, so we need to champion these movies. That being said, while I did find it interesting, and while I did find the performances engaging, there was just something off kilter about it, and not in an interesting or rich way, Tell me if I'm bugging here.
No, you're not.
Okay.
It sucks because right now this is currently my movie of the year, but that is
really more than Judas.
Yeah, definitely. But it's my personal taste. I fell in love with Under Silver Lake. I probably watched that movie like 8 times, and I can forgive this style of filmmaking, and eventually, though, as you knew, Under Silver Lake, I had to knock down a few pegs just because it took me a while to fight my own personal taste and be a good critic. And I feel like that's going to happen here, because when you look at it, this love triangle, isn't perfect, and it's not perfect because you never really truly feel the bond between Andrew Garfield and Robin from Stranger Things. I forget her name.
Maya Hawke, Ethan Hawke and Uma Thurman's daughter.
Yeah,
that's why she looks like a spitting image of both of them.
And so they do such a great job of having the other guy in their group, the writer, the musician, and writer,
Nat Wolff, Naked Brothers Band.
Yeah, exactly. Nat Wolff, who was amazing in this and so good. Like, honestly, the kid really grew up and became quite a good actor. Not that I didn't love Naked Brothers Band, but it's
Nickelodeon. It's Nickelodeon.
Yeah, and so like Nat Wolff and Maya Hawke's chemistry was awesome. You really felt for him. He was looking at her through the outside, wanting to be the guy that Andrew Garfield was. But the problem is they never showed Andrew Garfield and her have those moments before he got super famous on YouTube and before he started cheating around. And so when he was cheating on her, it was like, well, were they ever really officially a thing? I mean, they said it once, but you need to, in a movie that was doing such a good job of sticking to the fundamentals of filmmaking, showing you what you needed to show, giving you the emotions you needed. Strange to see they dropped the ball there. And I think it's because this message got in the way of the love story. And so I think it was a lot to handle. She's a young filmmaker, this Gia Coppola. And I think inevitably, even with the film this good, this solid, a young filmmaker, because, man, this was a phenomenal script. It was a phenomenal shot. The movie's beautifully shot. It's perfect. It's aesthetically so pleasing, but
so
it's a
pleasing.
lot to
Bro,
handle.
I saw chiaroscuro lighting. I'm like, oh my God, when was the last movie you saw chiaroscuro lighting? I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right. I don't even care because I'm just like, I'm not happy.
It was so good.
It was so refreshing to see.
And so I think the issue inevitably was going to be just the lack of experience from Gia Coppola and just the message of this movie being so big and so timely and needed. I feel like a lot of pressure.
I'll throw a couple more things into there. One, it definitely feels like the message because, again, like I'm not going to necessarily blame this on her per se. I'm going to blame this on Hollywood, which is Hollywood always puts out these types of messages, movies 5 years too late. Every single time. I feel like if this movie had come out in 2016 or 2017, I felt like it would have had a chance to have a lot bigger of an impact, and I felt like the messaging would have felt even more relevant because it would have been like calling this sort of like over-politicization and over-dependence on these sorts of things like ahead of when it would have actually happened, like around 2017, 2018, which is when this shit really started to kick into high gear as far as the over-politicization and over-dependence on this stuff and everything, right? And the other thing that I feel like that kind of, and it sucks because, again, he did such an incredible job with the part, is the writing of the Andrew Garfield character. I think all the stuff with the Maya Hawke character and the Nat Wolff character is there, right? Albeit with, like, again, it felt like some scenes were cut for the third act. I think the problem is with the Andrew Garfield character because, so he starts obviously with being exploited, right? But he's clearly got this, like, kind of sinister underlying edge. And then he, like, obviously kind of emerges almost as, like, this social media monster, right? This leech among leeches, right? Specifically with how he treats the Alexa Demi character. And then kind of Nat Wolff just kind of drops all that information about him. It's like, oh yeah, he's clearly crazy. It's like, well, yeah, no shit. We could have guessed that from the opening scene. There's clearly something up with him, you know? And then it just kind of goes nowhere and ends with like this long rambling monologue. And it's like, what? Like, where did this go? You know?
I think the reason that finale scene was so long, look, man, IFC, not the biggest studio.
Yeah.
Coppola, not the biggest director. Sure, she has the grandfather's name, so she probably squeezed out a little more money than she probably would have gotten. She was truly a nobody off the street. But I think it was a budgetary thing, right? I think so? There had to be some depth left on the cutting room floor. I think if you read the script, I think that relationship between, not only Garfield and Hawke, but Garfield and the brother who we see for a second there.
Who we see for a second and glimpse in the shadows, and he runs away, and then we're left to rely on Nat Wolff expositing what that entire thing was.
I think we wouldn't have had that exposition. I think we would have had that in the script. I think that we would have sort of had the fallout of them reaching this success, being here today, gone tomorrow, that sort of dichotomy of, well, that's what social media is, right? One app's, your post is here today, it's gone tomorrow. No one's like thinking about what you posted on Instagram next or last week. So stop thinking so seriously about it in the moment, right? I think that was the whole point of that one scene. And then I think a lot of this hinges on the budget and just the inexperience. But I do think really it came across very soundly. Like, we could start moving into star ratings if you want to sort of move the show along and hit some other topics that I know you want to hit. So the last thing I'll say is before I do my star ratings, for all the faults, I still really think it came across very strongly. I think it was a much needed message, albeit maybe a few years too late, but still, it's only getting worse with the addiction of social media. So at least if we have it, we have it, and people can go and find it.
Yeah.
And I think the meta aspect of, so these people were the counterculture, but then they become the culture, and having Jake Paul in there and other real world influencers in there.
That was awesome. That scene was incredible.
That was incredible, and I think it was so telling of, you fall for the trap. You fall for the trap of what you are against, and it was just so well done in that regard, but not a perfect film, but for me personally, perfect.
Yeah,
I
get
what about
it.
you before we do star ratings?
Yeah, so the only thing that I'll say is that I find that when it comes to critics, right, there are two different types of critics, right? There are people who go after story, and there are people that go after technicals, right? I would definitely favor myself as more of the technicals, right? Because my whole thing with story, right, is I am always willing to forgive on story faults per se, if there are certain other elements that I can really get into as far as that goes, maybe like a certain technical thing, versus I'll be a little bit harsher on the technicals if they don't necessarily live up to it, but there's always that one thing that usually lets me go a little bit vice versa, right? Mostly because I go based off of the mantra of, okay, look, every single story has been utilized, right? And there's really only 8 stories that are consistently used and make for the best movies, right? So I'm always willing to give it the benefit of the doubt when the story, something is changed up that doesn't necessarily make it work per se, but it's still interesting and compelling enough that it's like, okay, that creates for something new. Like Bad Times at the El Royale is an example that I think of. That's a movie that does everything wrong in like kind of the storytelling book, but it creates something so different and unique and has such a strong sense of character that I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. Also given the fact that that movie's made by somebody who knows what they're doing. With this instance, though, it's an instance where you're right, the messaging is so beyond strong that for the other elements to not work as well as they do, it kind of just drags it down, which is unfortunate because I think this had the potential to be like one of, if not, the best movie of the year. Unfortunately that nobody would talk about because, like you said, IFC, who the fuck knows what IFC is, We do, obviously, but like, just to put this in perspective, these are all the other movies that I've seen from IFC. Let me know if you've heard of one of these movies. Wildlife, Boyhood, Wiener Dog, The Rental, The House That Jack Built, Sleeping with Other People, Following, Fish Tank, and Y Tu Mama Tambien. I know for a fact you've heard of 2 of those movies, right? But any of those other ones have you heard of?
Yeah, I've heard of like 4 of those. Wildlife,
okay, all right.
A few, but only because we're in this circle, right?
Right, but only
If I
because
was
we're
a
in this
normal
circle, right?
Casual moviegoer, there's no chance I would,
Yeah.
shout out Ankit. If I was Ankit, the casual moviegoer, there's no chance I would have heard of these. Obviously, Ankit has heard of these, which is why his name is hilarious. But
that's
we gotta
funny.
get him back on the show.
Yeah,
But,
we do. It's been a while since we've had him on.
Yeah, no, for sure. I agree with your points. I think it wasn't a perfect film, so I'll just jump into my star ratings. I still loved it, though, and I think what you said about forgiving story is, yeah, I think it's more the critic's job to review the technicals and critique the technical aspects because, hey, story is, while the story is subjective and objective at the same time, I do think that it is a little harder to critique because as critics, we're not the ones writing it. And so, we don't know the choices made behind that. But I think something that's more universal is the language of filmmaking. So I think you can sort of be a little more critical on the way it looks, the way it feels, the way it's lit and all that stuff, right? Because we have that established. So with that being said, that's not to make an excuse for why my score is going to be so high. I loved this movie, but I just thought that was an interesting point you brought up that I never really heard you say. And so, yeah, this is a great film. I highly recommend it. It is niche. If you're not into something that is very specific, then don't waste your money on it. But I think if you do watch it and you love movies as much as Dom and I mean, you're in this stream right now, so of course you do. Yeah, watch it. And I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 because I think it deserves that. And she shows promise.
Yeah, I was close, man. I was really, really close. By the end, I'm like, oh man. Specifically with the Alexa Demi scene, that scene where he's got the girl on stage that he's making cry. I'm like, oh man, this is getting there, And the performances are so good, and the messaging is so good. But the ending comes, and I'm ultimately left unfulfilled. And I'm like, for this to be almost perfect and left unfulfilled, I had to dock it that extra half star. I could only go 3.5 for this one. I couldn't justify a 4. I just couldn't.
Hey, man, I get it.
It happens. We literally, I feel like, just had the exact opposite discussion last night, so.
That's hilarious. All right.
Yeah.
Well, hey, if you guys plan on watching Mainstream, let us know your thoughts.
Please do, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to say, are you guys into this random Andrew Garfield thing he's been on these past few years?
I'm digging it, honestly.
Me too, man. Let us know your guys' thoughts in the comment below. Of course, subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on the bell for notifications. And we have a few more topics. Dom, why don't you move
Yeah, a
us
few
into
more
our
topics.
next
So I wanted to kind of save the trailers aspect for like the last bit that we would kind of use to wrap up, obviously, because we got a couple trailers to catch up on this week. But I wanted to get into another thing. Again, I didn't mean to hog this stream as much as I wanted to. But again, there were two things, right, that dropped, right? And that's kind of the purpose of the show, right? There are two things that dropped that nobody will be talking about on any of their podcast streams. So we just had to cover that here because that's the purpose of this variety hour, right? We're here to talk about the shit that nobody else is talking about. We talked about Mainstream, which was dope. And now we're going to talk about Master of None, which is a show that after a certain point, no one thought was coming back, right? Just given that Aziz Ansari, unfortunately, was one of the first people, I think unfairly so, to be hit with the Me Too thing when it first started, right? When it was so weird, right? Back in 2017, when the Me Too thing started, right? And all these celebrities were being hit, right? Some that you were like, oh my God, like these people are absolute monsters. And some that you were like, again, just from like a common sense rationale standpoint, you're like, that just doesn't sound right. And that doesn't sound very one-sided. And I think the way that Aziz handled, right? It really sucks because it was kind of to a detriment to like the work that he was put out, right? Because Aziz Ansari, I think, was one of the up-and-coming talents that I thought really had a lot to show as far as what his talent was. But I think that Aziz's response to his whole kind of Me Too attempt, right? It was very interesting because he kind of came out, right, and he did this stand-up comedy special 2 years after the initial accusation, you know, the one that was directed by Spike Jonze, the one that was live from Madison Square Garden. And it wasn't even really a stand-up special. It was almost like kind of like this hour-long kind of retrospective where he was just like kind of looked back at the incident and kind of used it in order to like kind of reevaluate his entire life and his entire life's choices, right? And it's really awesome because I don't think you ever really get to see a comedian or really just an entertainment personality being that honest in general, right? I know you always have to take celebrity honesty with a grain of salt, right? But just for as far as like kind of how introspective that was, it was really, really interesting to see. And like I said, obviously, you know, this is just a selfish part of me, right? When he was first accused, and I'm like, fuck, Master of None is done now. And it really sucks because Master of None, as his follow-up show to Parks and Rec, having that legendary stint that he had on that show, and then for him to roll into something that wasn't quite a sitcom, but also wasn't quite really like any other show, right? I kind of thought of it in the same line of Atlanta, as far as being like this really introspective, like kind of just inside the comedian's head, right? But the comedian is not just trying to do like, oh, this is just me in this goofy sitcom. Instead, it's just kind of like he plays his character Dev, who's very clearly based on himself, to the point where he even casts his own parents as the character's parents in the show, as kind of like this struggling up-and-coming actor dealing with love in the city. The first season, right, was kind of like this on-again, off-again relationship that he had with this one girl that ultimately just doesn't work out by the end of it. And then season 2 goes in a complete opposite direction in a way that is kind of just like not expected at all from like really any show, right? And the interesting thing is that even before the Me Too thing happened with him, he even said, it's like after season 2, it's like, yeah, I don't even know if I want to keep doing another show about like a guy in his 30s, just kind of rolling through life, it's like, I don't, but the whole thing, right, is so much of TV is repetitive and about doing the same thing. I don't want to keep doing the same thing over again. And he didn't even know if he was going to come back and do a third season. It's like, yeah, I might wait a couple years. I might have a kid. I don't know, And I was just kind of thinking about that whole thing, right? And so I definitely will think that obviously it was a shock to me, and I feel like everyone else when it was announced that they had shot season 3, but also that it was going to be a drastic change in pace, that he was going to be taking more of a behind the scenes stage, he was going to be directing most of it, and that he was going to shift the focus of this new season to the character of Denise, portrayed in the show by Lena Waithe, obviously, who has become a big personality in and of herself in recent years. Obviously, she famously wrote Queen and Slim, which was a film that came out in 2019 that I thought was very, very introspective and very interesting and not nearly talked about enough when it came to awards time. And I definitely thought the choice was interesting, right? As far as that goes, as far as like a shift, right? I was obviously, the selfish part of me was like, man, we can't get another season of just about Aziz, but I'm like, you know what? It's changing pace. I'll go with it. Like I trust the show and I trust him enough as a creator to go with it. And what I'll say about it is that it's very clear that obviously that the circumstances within Me Too led to the shift in focus, not necessarily because of anything having to do with like, oh, he's worried about his public persona. Not at all. What I mean by that is kind of that introspection that he got from the incident and from kind of reconsidering everything, I think caused him to kind of like want to take a step back and want to focus more of his artistic passions into other areas, right? That he wasn't necessarily like less time in front of the camera, more time behind the camera. And that shows in every single frame because it's only 5 episodes this past season and it is one of the most beautifully, immaculately shot things ever. I think this is the first thing I've seen like recently where there are no camera movement. There's no camera movement at all. It's all static shots, all on tripod, right? All placed in in order to kind of show off the wide variety.
Like
all
Wes Anderson vibe.
Kind of, yeah. All shot in 4:3 ratio, right? Not quite with the symmetry, but as far as capturing the scenery, right? It was very, very atmospheric. It was very Terrence Malick like. It was very clear that Aziz was continuing with the lessons that he was trying to implement on himself in season 2, with where he has the first episode of season 2 act as a direct homage to Italian neorealism, specifically with bicycle thieves. Literally, the premise of that first episode of season 2 is he loses his phone, and so and he's living in Italy, right? So it's just him and this little Italian kid just wandering around the city trying to find his phone, and the entire thing is shot in black and white. He barely knows how to speak Italian, right? But he's got a few words here and there, and it's just great, the dialogue and how it plays out. It's super playful, it's super charming and everything. And
I do gotta say, before you get too far away from it, I think I am curious now, hearing you speak on this, to go and watch this show just for the progression, because I do think it is fascinating when a show abandons what it's originally known for and completely changes form. I just, as an artist, I think it's, hey, sometimes your artist progression, you can't replicate what you've been doing for so long. You just change as a person, as a creator. And is that something that works for television when there's a format and there's a comfortability with getting something slightly different in regards to a new season, but still cut from the same cloth? And it seems like it's not cut from the same cloth from what you're saying. And so I don't know, I almost want to watch it for that. But I will say this, I did try and watch the first 2 episodes of the first season back when it dropped so long ago now.
So long ago, 5 years ago now.
Yeah, it wasn't
6
for me,
actually.
Yeah, so long ago. It wasn't for me, but I am curious, as now that back then I was just a musician who dabbled with watching TV and film, and now I feel myself a musician as well as a film critic. I don't know, I might have to go and watch this all, but that's just kind of what I was getting based off what you were talking about.
Yeah, I'll definitely say that, the first season came out very close to Parks and Rec, and the first season, I will say, was a lot more of a typical show. Obviously, I think 2015 was a very interesting year for Netflix. I feel like that was the last time that they were truly experimental before they started to settle into some of their, really bad cliches and patterns that you and I both obviously are not fans of at all. But there was some interesting stuff that they put out that year. That was the first season of Daredevil. That was the second season of BoJack Horseman. That was the third season of House of Cards. Master of None debuted. There was a lot of interesting stuff that they were doing and experimenting with and fooling around with, right? And I'll even give credit where credit is due to the first season of Jessica Jones, which I was not the biggest fan of the first time around, but I came around on it as time went on, especially considering, the majority of quality that came with the later Marvel shows that ended up dropping on Netflix. But I think the thing that I took away after having watched these 5 episodes, right, is that more than anything, it's a movie stretched out into 5 episodes, right, which take that as what you will here or there. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I'll say that while it does a good job of continuing the spirit of what made the first season, particularly the second season, I would say, compelling, the story, I think, took a big plummet. And the other thing to keep in mind is it is beyond obvious that this was a COVID shoot. Very similar to Malcolm and Marie, where there's just, again, I can't fault it because, again, certain episodes are, again, only 25 minutes, and, so I'm not going to fault it, right, when there's not that much happening, because, okay, it's, at the very least, it still moves quick. But when there's just, a 20-minute segment of just having a conversation that seemingly goes nowhere and doesn't really contribute to the story, and then just cut to a random insert shot of nature, and then back to another sequence, it's what? What's going on here? So that's kind of that's kind of my only thing really that I have to add to that, which is that, well, I admire the effort, right? Especially considering it is so beyond difficult to bounce trajectory from that and make it look seamless, right? And I give credit to Aziz and Lena Waithe, who helped them write the season in addition to acting in it. I give them credit for being able to do what they did with this, right? And obviously, it was never going to have the magic that those first 2 seasons, again, particularly the second season, did. But just from a story lens, I gotta say I wasn't the biggest fan of it. I don't necessarily know if it's a matter of this story in particular or just a matter of types of breakup stories in general don't necessarily always do it for me, but it just definitely felt like there were bits and pieces of the story. Obviously there are jumps in time. Obviously there are certain activities, right? There are certain episodes that just focus on these very, very painful, tragic subject matter, right? And the show is definitely matured with time, right? But there are just certain moments that leave you going, okay, why did you do that? And okay, wait, what? So we're just expected to kind of just like forget about everything that we just happened. I don't like stories that set up something that seems like very, very important and then ends up just kind of abandoning it for the sake of, okay, we got to wrap this up now, And so while I'll definitely say that from an artistic and craft lens, it's an interesting continuation of Aziz's talents just as an overall just creator in general, I can't say necessarily that I was the biggest fan of this, especially considering how much I loved the first 2 seasons. Like both of those first 2 seasons were in my top 10 favorite TV shows of the respective years in which they were released. I think Master of None season 2 was like my number 2 of 2017 behind I'm Dying Up Here. Like I love that second season. It is still to me unlike anything else that I've seen on TV, like just in general.
Cool. Well, hey man, it seems like I have something to watch. So
yeah.
With that being said, did you just want to give a rating for the season? And
yeah.
move on to topics?
Again, like the technicals are amazing, but again, just for the story, man, it's another 3.5 out of 5 stars, which sucks because like for me, that second season is almost a 5. There are like bits and pieces that hold it slightly back, but it is as close to a 5 as I would give any season of television. So like, it's still a drop, which sucks because like I said like the passion and the creativity and just kind of the spirit and the vibe that made those first 2 seasons so good is still there, It just, again, I got to do some research into as far as like how much of held back this was because of the COVID of it all, right? Because again, it is so beyond obvious. Again, like almost the entirety of the first 3 episodes are in one location. Like it's beyond obvious it was a COVID shoot, But and they shot it in London too, right? But I'm just like, man, I'm like, there was just something that the magic wasn't there this time,
Yeah, that'll happen.
It happens, man. All but right. So you want to get to these trailers? So you want to get to these trailers?
Let's do it. We have a couple trailers to talk about, guys. Yeah. Of course, let Dom know your thoughts about Masters.
If you've even watched it, because again, like I think it's already dropped down to like number 7 on the Netflix top 10. So if you even knew that there was a new season of Master of None, like let me know, honestly, in general, because Netflix does what it does and it doesn't market shit. So.
Yeah, let Dom know in the comments below. Of course, subscribe, turn on the bell for notifications, and leave a like on this video. What's up, Matt? Matt saying, man, Quiet Place Part 2 was mid. Okay, that sucks.
Oh, man, that's disappointing. That's disappointing to hear.
Wow, he was in disbelief.
Wow.
Didn't like the film. All right, well, no spoilers. We're right. Go watch it after this. But that is a bummer to hear. I'm sorry.
That is disappointing to hear.
Well, hey, maybe, Matt, you can let us know what you thought about Marvel's Eternals first.
Eternals trailer. Yeah, right?
Dropped.
Yeah.
And let me say, Dom.
Yeah. Let's hear your thoughts first, cuz.
Yeah, it takes a lot for me to get excited for something Marvel.
Whoa. Whoa.
I was thinking about it. I'm pretty excited.
Wow. People, mark this occasion. Chris is officially excited about something coming from the dreaded Marvel Studios.
I am, for 2 reasons. One, if you think about it in a story aspect, with all that stuff happening with Thanos, and obviously then sort of in the galactic realm of things with all the different times that Star-Lord could have used their help, they just remained silent and sat back. So maybe there is a huge plan for, phases 4 through 7, because hey, these dudes seem to be the strongest people we've ever met yet, and they were sitting on the sideline through Thanos. Okay, you got me intrigued. And second of all, I'm gonna have to go with Matt's comment, the look. Finally, there is some style in a Marvel film. It's not just this amalgamation, it seems, of just homogenized, it has to look like this, and this is the superhero look, and it has the same sheen as every other movie, and it almost doesn't matter who the director attached to it is because it's going to look the same. And I'm just glad we're kind of hopefully maybe breaking that mold, getting a little bit of taste. I thought Chloe Zhao's Nomadland was phenomenal, as heart-wrenching as it is, and even though I never want to see it again, it's because it was that emotionally powerful where it evoked such a reaction in me where it's like, yep, it's a one-and-done movie because I cannot put myself through that again. And so I just think the stars are lining up in this one to sort of offer something a little more out of, because look, you guys know I'm a comic book lover. Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm talking about. It has class. It looks like it has some of that, I do think it'll work well for both of us too, Matt, because I think it has, that's true too. The cast as well is another thing, Kumail Nanjiani, that's going to be awesome to see what he brings. And so it's, and the last thing is, it has this like class to it. It has this sort of respect for filmmaking that I can totally agree with Scorsese when he bashes Marvel. Granted, I think that, he went a little too hard against it in that sense, but I do understand what he's saying. And so I think that this can maybe bring some of what he's saying is lost to the superhero genre, which is clearly, especially Marvel being the dominant player in the dominant genre. And I just like that. I was intrigued, and I'm looking forward to it off of the first look. But what's your take on this Eternals first look?
All right. So first off, I just want to clarify the Scorsese comments. Not that I feel like I need to clarify anything for one of the last, great living filmmakers of obviously our modern age. But I definitely think that obviously people at the time were just like kind of a little bit too quick to jump down his throat, especially because I think it's very, very, definitely was a little bit like kind of, there was some. Oh my God, what's the word I'm looking for? There was some reasoning behind why he made those comments when he did, right around when Avengers Endgame came out, right when he had a movie that was about to drop on Netflix. Like, come on, let's not kid ourselves as far as why he made those comments. But the one thing that I wanted to clarify is the fact that I feel like what he was trying to say about Marvel is I feel like more so applicable to like just blockbuster spectacle filmmaking in general, and just the reason per se why people are going to the movies, right? Which again is something that he's a big champion of, is the idea of going to see movies in their traditional form and see how the only things that seem to drive theatrical revenue are the giant blockbuster spectacle pieces, of which Marvel is a large part of. That, I feel like, is where more so he was coming from, and then just obviously fanboys on the internet just went nuts and were like, oh, you can't talk bad about superheroes, even though it's like, dude, like, what else do you watch? Like, can you even say that? But, yeah, as far as the Eternals trailer go, I'm like, look, I've watched every single Marvel trailer. I'm to the point in my Marvel journey where is Dustin. Honestly, I'm with.
I love how Dom just removed himself from the stream midstream. That's absolutely hilarious. But I think he was gonna say something along the lines of, "Yeah, Dustin, he's with you. Like, give us some information on that." But that is absolutely hilarious. So yeah, Dom.
I can't believe I just did that. I cannot believe I just did that. I literally.
What are you saying?
I just removed myself from the stream. I was saying I was with. I was saying I was with Dustin. As far as I agree, I have no idea what No Way Home is gonna be. I can't believe I just did that. That was hilarious. Now I think that was the first time I've ever done that. That was amazing. But that's why these things only happen live. But
that's true.
Yeah, Matt, I'll agree with you. Phase 4 has been different in an awful way because I've hated everything that's happened post Endgame. It just feels like they're just trying to drag out the success. Because like I said, Endgame felt like an ending, right? If Endgame didn't feel like as much of an ending as it did, I wouldn't care as much about some of the stuff that they were doing, right? But it's the fact that Endgame felt like such and like a finite ending for that story that it felt like we were getting something that everything afterwards, it feels like, it just feels like it's kind of undoing all of, again, not the majesty per se of what we got before, but kind of the, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of, again, just kind of, I feel like what it is that we all of us MCU fans got from it, and it feels like everything else is just kind of like trying to recapture that glory though, The one thing I will say is that this is the first, I think, Marvel thing that I've seen post Endgame that I think I'm actually excited for in a way that I'm like, okay, how do I phrase this? In a way of like, okay, so we obviously know that Marvel has their own formula. Marvel has their kind of, I'm just doing my best to ignore the comments because it's just distracting as fuck just in general and I can't focus on shit, but I still can't believe I just did that. I still cannot believe that I just did that. I literally just went to look at another document and somehow I clicked on my fucking Watch Cartoon Online tab that's sitting right there. I feel like we can't even get to the, we can't even literally just get to the last bit. I'm like, I can't, I
ask you about Eternals and Luke quotes you. All right, I'm gonna head out.
I'm like, I'm out. I'm done. I'm fucking done with Marvel. We've officially switched places. Chris is the Marvel fanboy. I'm out. I'm like, I can't even deal with any Marvel discussion. Wow. Oh, man. But look, the one thing I will say is that I think the thing that is becoming, the thing that I'm looking forward to in Marvel going forward is seeing which of the filmmakers that they bring on can have their sort of stylisms shine above the Marvel of it all, if that makes any sense, right?
It makes 100% sense, and it's exactly what I'm looking for.
Yes, because obviously, aside from James Gunn and what he brought to the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, right, we really didn't get that sense from any of the Marvel movies, even the ones that I liked leading up to Phase 3, right? The Russo brothers, as awesome as what it is that they brought to the table, they're not known for their stylisms, right? But I think specifically towards the latter half of Phase 3, we really started to get that. I think we definitely got that with Taika Waititi with Thor Ragnarok. We definitely got it with Ryan Coogler with Black Panther. And I think even to a certain extent, even though this isn't one of the more liked Marvel movies, I think we sort of got it with Peyton Reed, right? With Ant-Man and the Wasp. I definitely think we got that. And I think that this is going to be the next example of that, as far as getting a director who obviously has made a big impact with Nomadland, has been coming up and making the rounds as far as having this very distinct, individualized style of filmmaking. And I definitely think that it shows here, which is, well, I'm not necessarily a fan of the color grading. I still think it's a little bit flat for me, especially given the fact that these are supposed to be like these larger than life, like immortalized, like god deity-esque characters, right? Kind of the first time that we're really getting that in the MCU, considering the fact that the MCU so much has been about humanizing their characters, even their literal gods, right? And I'm definitely interested as far as I'm like, okay, so already we're seeing the internet memes pop up of, oh, they were just sitting there, just twiddling, just eating dinner while Thanos wiped away half the universe, right? So obviously, it definitely shows that that's going to have a part to play, right, as far as that goes. But I will definitely say that, like, kind of my enjoyment of this is largely motivated by just seeing kind of what it's going to entail, because I think this is the first time since Guardians of the Galaxy where I have no comprehension of who these characters are or what they're going to entail. I don't necessarily think that it's going to be anything groundbreaking per se, but those are the pieces that I'm looking forward to. Seeing if Chloe Zhao's stylisms, because I think this is ultimately going to prove, right, what makes her as a filmmaker, right? Because ultimately, right, the make or break, I think at this point, right, everyone gets Marvel, literally everyone gets mopped up in Marvel. Like, literally, like, Olivia Colman and Emilia Clarke are already cast in Secret Invasion, like, out of nowhere, where it's like, okay. But I think the true test, right, is seeing whether your stylisms can last and stand out within the corporate muck, right? In a weird way, kind of getting back to what the original idea of auteurism was about in the first place, before that term and that definition kind of shifted in the 90s and the 70s and the 90s. But for that, and to see what this cast brings, obviously, and like how they kind of tackle the characterization, but also what this cast brings, because this is one of the most diverse and I will say strange casts that Marvel has ever assembled. You've got two kind of movie stars of yesteryear, right, that have kind of still been like, making the rounds, obviously, throughout with Angelina Jolie and Salma Hayek, and you've got a lot of newcomers, right, that have kind of been, making the rounds, with Brian Tyree Henry and Gemma Chan and Richard Madden and Kit Harington, obviously, with the reunification, like Luke mentioned, of the Stark brothers, obviously, and Kumail Nanjiani. And, obviously the newcomers, who every Marvel movie has that newcomer who becomes like an instant superstar afterwards. And I definitely think it's going to be interesting. I can't necessarily say that this was that trail that like got me excited and was like, whoa, like I can't wait for this. This is going to be insane. No, I definitely think that Shang-Chi did that a little bit more, if only just from an action standpoint, because I think just the action in that movie looks off the chain, right? And I feel like that's always the easiest thing to market in these movies is the action spectacle. But for this to be like a largely spectacle-based movie with no action in it, like, at all, I definitely think that's impressive to say the least, and I'm definitely interested to see where it goes. Yes, Dustin, the guy with the whiniest voice I think I've heard so far, who still has yet to actually impress me as an actor, Barry Keoghan. Yes.
Yeah, let me riff off that. I think I was intrigued. It's a first look. I'm excited.
Right.
That it was a different first look. Really, is where my excitement stems from. I'm still definitely treading lightly because it's Marvel, and this is really going to show me a few things. One, it's going to show me, hey, how is this Marvel system? Is it as for the creator as we think, or is a director who's as unique as Artur, as Chloe Zhao? Is she gonna have to play ball, or is she gonna have full creative reign? Because we're gonna know instantly if it's gonna look like the formula or if it's gonna be something new within that mold, and maybe even redefine that mold for future directors of her ilk to come in and sort of pick up the mantle and sort of play ball with like the mainstream biggest pop culture zeitgeist movement right now in film and TV, which is superheroes. So it's going to be very telling, I think, regardless of if the movie's good or bad. We're just going to it's going to kind of, I think, change the landscape of the genre. It's either going to give us more of the same and really, drive away anyone who is of the Chloe Zhao mindset from ever touching a Marvel property again, or it's going to, kind of like maybe add some of what Scorsese's looking for into this medium of film. And I think that we could find a perfect, beautiful medium. I think like Chris Nolan films arguably were kind of like, the Batman were kind of, I think, what Scorsese is looking for in a, at least for me, that's, I wish every superhero film was like those.
Yeah, right.
And maybe Chloe Zhao can bring that back and establish it as like a mainstay. That'd be cool. And then the second thing for me, I think, with in the internals of it all and the phase 4 of it all, really is, this is what I was looking for out of phase 4. There's always going to be that, hey, well, where were you when this was happening? Because obviously the whole Thanos thing was just not only for the pop culture so big, but in that universe, if we're talking like canon and story, just so major. And the implications, I don't think you will never stop feeling in the MCU. You'll never stop feeling the fallout of the blip in the MCU. I just think that's impossible. But I think with films that look as promising as Shang-Chi on the horizon and Eternals sort of hoping to offer something new in this very oversaturated and very homogenized space, maybe we can over time just welcome new additions without always being like, well, where were you and why didn't you help? Like maybe we can start to have fun with it again and take it less seriously, because I think that's another thing that's kind of happened within the superhero genre, is just like, you don't need to have on set anymore continuity people, because just go on Reddit or YouTube and it's right there. Like everyone is making sure every little I's dotted and T's crossed when it comes to their newest superhero property. And
if anything, it
and,
makes
and
the continuity people even more needed.
Yeah, I don't think we need to police every aspect of it. So hey, maybe this can just breathe some new life into, in my opinion, a stale medium. But that's all I really have to say about it. It was only a first look. It wasn't
exactly
too serious, but
yeah. It was interesting, though, and I wanted to point out one last thing, which I think is hilarious, and I don't know if you've heard anything about this, but just the Kevin Feige of it all, because Kevin Feige never ceases to amaze me with the man is so powerful, but he's one of those guys that I don't think necessarily grasps the idea of just how powerful he really is. When Chloe Zhao was apparently sending him stills of the footage that she shot, he's just, like, blown away, right? Because he's so used to, like, the CG filmmaking, and he's literally like, oh my god, that CG is incredible, like, how did you shoot it, right? Because he's, like, a guy that's apparently constantly amazed by the filmmaking process, and she's like, it's actual scenery. Now, whether or not she was actually telling the truth or not, I don't know. But just the fact that, like, Kevin Feige can be that blown away by just, like, shots of waves on, like, a shoreline is just hilarious to me. And, like, I just had to point that out. So, Chris, let's wrap this up with I think the trailer, and really what should have been the story of the week. And the fact that this trailer was not getting the hype that it was, this saddens and that just breaks my heart and just continues to, like, convince me that cinema is dead, because motherfucker, oh man, that Last Night in Soho trailer, god damn, I've been looking forward to this movie ever since it was announced based off the trailer. I don't even give a fuck what the premise is. Edgar Wright's doing a horror movie, like a straight, like a period, like a weird, mysterious gothic period horror piece. Let's go. I'm like, Anya Taylor-Joy, Thomasin McKenzie, 11th Doctor from Doctor Who. I'm like some other, the Terrence Stamp, I think I even saw at one point. I'm like, oh, let's fucking go. Let's fucking go. Like, the trailer gave us, I think, a little tidbit of the story, but this just, to me, immediately ratified everything that it is that we love about Edgar Wright's sensibilities and styles. He, again, continues to prove that he is a man who can get his vision and his ideal style of filmmaking across in an era that is becoming more and more and more oversaturated by studio-driven filmmaking. Chris, man, I mean, you're the biggest Scott Pilgrim versus the World fan that I know, obviously, among many other people who are fans of that movie. Shaun of the Dead was a revolution when it came out. Baby Driver, I don't know if you got a chance to watch that. That movie's fantastic.
Yeah, I love that movie.
I'm not the biggest fan of Hot Fuzz, but even I give that movie props for where it was. Like, oh man, are you looking forward to this movie?
Yeah, I mean, Baby Driver was phenomenal, so great. I think that Scott Pilgrim is a national treasure at this point, even though Edgar Wright's English, but whatever. It's still good, and
speaks English. It's like,
yeah, but he's just not. He's not.
I know.
But maybe it's an England national treasure. I hope they cherish that movie as much as people over here do. But yeah, so speaking of Edgar Wright sort of doing something in the horror genre that isn't sort of comical, zombies are technically horror, though at this point, as we spoke about on our Army of the Dead podcast, it's kind of become its own subgenre within the genre, so you don't really have to like classify it with the rest of horror films, whereas this is a little more traditional in the sense of like the what's going on. This looks pretty creepy. It's got your typical trappings of intrigue in the trailer that you want to see. and it just looks so promising. That's what I'll say. It looks so beautiful in the trailer. It really looks like you could fall in love with this trailer, and I had to stop myself from falling in love with this trailer so that my expectations can be managed going into this film so I can be a good critic, because I want to love this so much, but I haven't seen it yet, and I just think that's not who I am, or that's not who I'm going to be as a critic. But god damn, does this thing look like it has so much potential. This looks like it could be the Invisible Man of this year. Like, honestly, it does. It has that, like, hey, this is a crazy concept, but it's not just a schlocky horror film. This is really going to make you think, and it's going to rock your world.
Yes.
Like, it has that vibe.
I just think that it continues with the visual stylisms and look. The one thing I'll say is that the last time, like 2017, right? 2017 really was like my kind of last year. I think it's ironic, right, that the last time that we got an Edgar Wright and a Paul Thomas Anderson movie in the same year was 2017. I think that's very, very interesting as far as how that goes, right? But look, the last time that I'll say that I was skeptical going into a movie by an auteur, and I'll say that, right, because Edgar Wright is an auteur. He's proven himself. He's earned that title at this point many, many times over, right? The last time that I went in kind of being skeptical, I'll say, about an auteur-driven film was with Paul Thomas Anderson's Phantom Thread, which turned out to be one of my favorite movies of 2017. And that movie blew me away and took me took the story and took me in different ways that kind of proved to me, oh my God, these types of films can still be like this, you know? And Baby Driver was definitely a lot more in Edgar Wright's wheelhouse, even though that was very homage-driven to previous films. It still had a lot of his sensibilities in it, right? And it still had kind of like a lot of areas that we were familiar with, right? Even if I definitely think he did an interesting take on kind of the whole movie star element of it, right? Because there are a lot of big-name stars in that movie, right? Kevin Spacey, Jamie Foxx, John Hamm, fresh off of Mad Men, right? And I definitely think he did a really interesting job playing around with like our kind of familiar sensibilities with those typical cast members, right? But the thing that I find so interesting about this is like a completely another tonal shift from him, right? Which I love. I love when auteurs can do this because it just showed that they're able to like expand on their ability as a filmmaker. And like the fact that this is like a trailer that first off had no dialogue in it. I don't think there was a single bit of dialogue in this entire movie. So the fact that it's driven on largely visuals, the fact that you had like the fact that this looks like so different, like jarring, like tonally for him, like this is not a comedy at all per se. Like as far as I'm concerned, I don't have like any fucking blinders on as far as that. I'm going in full in with this one. I'm fully excited to see it. I cannot wait because in addition, like I said, to this movie, we're also getting Paul Thomas Anderson's Soggy Bottom. Fucking despise that title, and I'm going to be really pissed if that's the title of his next movie, but we're getting that as well later on in this year. Like, we're getting a decent amount of auteur-driven movies this year. We're getting a new Coen Brothers this year. We might get the new Scorsese movie this year. We're getting new Spielberg, new Del Toro, new Adam McKay, new David O. Russell. We're getting new Iñárritu potentially. We're getting a lot of auteur-driven movies later this year, so I don't think the fall... We're only in May, but the fall of this year is already looking to be stacked as far as that goes. So I'm looking forward to it, man, and I'm really, really happy to hear that you're looking forward to it as much as I am. But
I am. I truly am. It looks very promising. So,
it's going to be awesome.
Said, this is a great show, I think.
Hell yeah, definitely. Now we're going to go watch Quiet Place Part 2. And so people, what did you think of the latest episode of our Talkin' TV Variety Hour? We'll be back next week as always. Thank you actually, Dustin, for reminding me new Jason Reitman as well, for even if it is, Ghostbusters. What did you guys think of our latest variety show? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Let us know if you're actually going to watch any of the stuff that I brought up. It's understandable if you don't, but I definitely think that I feel like the entire purpose of this podcast tonight was to, support auteur-driven work because there's not enough of it now, and when we get it, we got to champion it, even if we don't necessarily like it. And I love also that Luke brought up Old, which, sure, you can call Shyamalan an auteur, you can call it what you will, but I'm looking forward to Old in the way that I was kind of looking forward to Fantasy Island, if you know what I mean, So, let us know your thoughts. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Be sure to follow us on our Instagram pages and Facebook pages at Talkin' TV Podcast. Be sure to click the subscribe button on this video. Click the like button if you haven't already. It just helps us out in the algorithm. That way we can continue to give you guys the content that it is that you so deserve. Chris, where can the good people find you on the interwebs?
Yeah, well, they can find me here on the channel Monday night as we talk about our thoughts on Quiet Place Part 2. That's a fact, and I can't wait for you guys to hear, because it seems that Dom and I come at this one from different places. So that
I see what you did there. I see what you did there.
And I think on top of it, man, I have a personal social everything, and you can go find that at Christian Evanko. Although I feel guilty about promoting it, considering we talked about mainstream in this episode, but I will anyways because even they bought into the system they were so against. And so,
Oh
with
man.
that being said, I will sacrifice my dignity and tell you to click the link in my bio to listen to my music. I love what I create, and I hope you guys will enjoy it too. And also click the link in my bio and find my other podcast, Talkin with Andrew and Chris, a show about life, music, and everything in between. Again, that's at Christian Evanko. Dom, where can they find you? Are you gonna sacrifice your dignity and tell them where they can find
I
you on the
mean, look,
internet?
if the people think that me being on social media is me sacrificing my dignity and assuming that I haven't already done so like 14 times over for different reasons that they will never know about, they're kidding themselves. But if they do desperately seek to humble me by following me on my social media presences where I just mostly make sarcastic posts and just post about trailers and movie news because that's really all I care about, because that's really my only reason for living, you can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Movie Nerd Reviews, all one word. Although I did recently earn a new title from my coworker at work that I think is kind of I think it's kind of befitting of me. I'm not saying that like the movie nerd as my official title is going away anytime soon, but I had to bring it up. So, Chris, what do you think of the term movie Karen?
That's not you.
You don't think it's me? Okay, because there are people who
Karen's
do.
a negative
So
thing.
I know, but like I don't know, just it's kind of like one of those like kind of ironic terms. And I thought I don't know, it kind of gave me a chuckle. So it kind of gave me a chuckle.
But you're not a movie Karen. You're I think movie Karens are reserved for the sheeple and all those types of things.
The sheeple. I love it. You can follow all of us with everything that we're doing with all the social media presences that we just announced. We'll be back obviously next week for our next podcast with A Quiet Place 2. Our next Fast and Furious first time watch. We got the big one this coming week. It's going to be Fast 5, people. The big one, the apex. You're not going to want to miss it. We'll be back next Friday for the next variety stream. We'll see you guys then. Next time you guys see me, I'm going to be coming to you, next week, I should say, not for this coming Sunday, with our next Talkin' Thrones episode, which I forgot to mention as well. Episode 5 of that will be up live on Sunday. I'll be coming to you guys from my brand new place once I finish the move. Ultimately, it's going to be a long, tenuous process, but it's going to be fun, and I'm glad to have you guys there with me the whole way. 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll catch you guys next time.